Good morning, Berean. It's good to see you here. It's by faith. It's good to see everybody on the internet. I hope you see me, even though I can't see you. This morning we are looking at our third week of instruction and teaching on the idea of work fallen. As you know, we take August to look at one particular idea, and the last year we looked at work in its creation. Work is designed. This year we're looking at work fallen. And for the last couple weeks, Pastor Skeppel has taken us through basically Genesis 3 at a slow roll, and we've seen how the responsibilities of both the man and the woman have been complicated and thwarted by the fall. So this morning we're going to take our third look at that, and before I do, let's just go ahead and pray, please. Father, we're grateful to be able to come to you. We're grateful to be able to open your word and to look at what you've written. We look forward to seeing what you have, although this is a very depressing and dismal subject this morning. We ask that you would attend your word by your Spirit, and that we would, in fact, know more about ourselves and more about you, that we would appreciate you more and the love that you have given to your children. Help us this morning, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. So, this morning's emphasis, as you can see by the title, is going to be in Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is an interesting book. It's a sort of a philosopher's book, a practical philosopher's book. We know that the author is Solomon. If you read what is said in verse 1 of chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes 1:1, it says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem." And it's very hard to match that description up to anybody else other than Solomon. And so with Solomon, we have an author who is kind of uniquely posed in a position to deal with the subject at hand. He is a wise king, the wisest of all kings until King Jesus comes along. And he is going to find or look for some meaning and purpose in life. And it's good that it's Solomon doing this. He has resources. Solomon had resources that not your average person had. And he is a king, he is wise, and he is wealthy. And so what he investigates, he's able to throw his life into and find what the purpose, what the meaning, what the core of that thing is. And so if you read this, he tests things like wisdom and entertainment and various pleasures of the senses and academic pursuits, personal wealth, civic responsibilities, and the list goes on that Solomon is going to put to the test and find what is the value in those things. Well, as he investigates what we throw our lives into, what he threw his life into, as he investigates these things, he makes throughout the book several observations on these subjects and on these pursuits. And if I had to say there was one thing that kind of encapsulates what his investigations have found out, it's probably something like Ecclesiastes 2:11. And this is not the only verse that speaks like this, but this is a good representative. It says, "Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labors which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity, and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun." Now that's a pretty depressing thought. That's a pretty depressing judgment on everything. But he found out that there was nothing there that was hard, concrete, value, intrinsically good in and of itself, and that's terrible for us, because as we invite ideas into our life that we want to investigate, as we throw our resources into something, what he is saying is ultimately you're going to be frustrated. And I have 4 kids that have gone to college and one more right on the edge of the decision-making of college. And 3 of those kids, 3 of the 5 I'm talking about, went right off from high school to college very smoothly. 2 of them came to Pam and I and said, "Look, college looks like a lot of chasing of the wind. It looks like you're chasing something that is not that meaningful, but that everybody does, at least everybody in their circles did. And you have to pay a lot of money to do that. And so these two felt like they were sort of interested in it, and they were decent students. They had the ability to go to college, but they weren't sure that should be their next step. And as I reflected on this personally, because I'd already read what Solomon said about these things, I could not totally disagree with them. Now, I could talk about relative merit to them, but Solomon says throwing your life into these things ends up in vanity, whether you're pursuing something individual, and it says something about our institutions, it says something about our whole world, right? And so these kids on their own had found out and saw their brothers and sisters and had decided that Solomon was right even before they really triangulated Solomon in, probably. Now, they eventually sort of changed their minds on some things, but you see the problem in practical application. Whenever you get to Solomon and the book of Ecclesiastes, you're struck by this word that shows up all the time throughout the book, is vanity. And anybody who's going to take you through Ecclesiastes, I'll tell you ahead of time, you know you've got a decent teacher on your hand when they start defining this word right up front, because it just happens too frequently to not define. And what this comes from a Hebrew word, hebel, and vanity is translated, hebel is translated vanity in a lot of translations. Sometimes it's the idea of meaninglessness or weightlessness or unfulfilling. It describes something that holds some promise, but then it lets you down, it doesn't pay off. And so you think it's something at first, but it turns out not to be something, right? And the image I like is the idea of steam that's rolling off of a boiling pot, say, of water. And so the steam looks impressive. You know it's really hot. You wouldn't put your hand over that steam an inch away from the pot. You wouldn't do that. If you put your hand into the steam an inch over the pot, you will hurt yourself. So the steam is very impressive. However, 12 inches away from the pot, the steam is gone, the heat is dissipated, and what seemed to be powerful and dangerous has really just 1 foot away become nothing, right? And so, Pastor, could you help me there? Yeah. And so this idea, the steam looks powerful, it looks like it's something, but it turns out 1 foot away, it's not that much, really. And so that's what we're talking about with Hevel, something that looks like something, but in all actuality, it's weightless. If you want to contrast it, defining it by contrast, it's the opposite of glory, okay? When the Bible describes like God as being glorious, that idea is heavy, weighty, important. It's the opposite of Hevel, okay? And so what Solomon is saying here is as he tries things out that we think are important, that he thought were important, he's going to find them to be weightless, that they promise something but they don't pay off, they're not long lasting, they're shaky. And again, Solomon's a great guy to test these things because he has resources. For example, if he wants to go for entertainment, he'll get the best singers, the best dancers, the best parties, the best liquor, the best everything. And so if you think any of those things have some weight to it, Solomon's going to be able to test it out at its extremes. If you think it's wisdom, he's going to get the best scholars, the best books, the best libraries. Everybody who can bring him wisdom, he can test out that stuff in ways that nobody else could. So he's a great person to test some of these things, but the problem is when he tests them out, he finds out they are weightless, they are vanity, right? And so I want to take a look at, as you know, as the topic is his investigation of work in particular. Knowing that work can't be evaluated from the outside, Solomon becomes a workaholic, throwing everything he had into it. He not only worked for himself, he mobilized other people, he managed, and he's known for great construction projects. He followed his father's instructions and built this incredibly huge, fabulous temple that was just beautiful and massive. He also built some palaces for different people, himself included. And when he woke up every morning, he was able to step out on a balcony and see that he had just recreated the city. The landscape was changed because of his work. However, as you read his description and report, how does he describe all this? The words of his summary are things like meaningless, chasing wind, hatred, toil, despair, anxious striving, pain and grief. Now, why would that be? Why is his work that way? Let's look at some of the specifics. First of all, Solomon finds that work is insecure. Here's a quote, and you can find these dotted all throughout Ecclesiastes. In some ways, it's just easy to cherry pick because he just makes these statements everywhere. But he says, "Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool, yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I've labored, acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity." So his argument here is you work hard, you gain something, and then you have to put it in the hands of another person. Who knows what that lady is going to do with it, okay? And let me just pause here because I think we need to go back to what we've learned the past couple weeks. When we say work, I'm not just talking about your 9-to-5 thing, okay? This includes both sides of Adam and Eve and that statement that God made over both of them. And I know it looked like Eve only got hit in areas of relationships, her husband and her child, and Adam only got hit on things that hit him 9-to-5. But the truth is, the whole thing was fallen in all things. And so if you walked out of chapter 3 and you thought, you know what, as a female, I'm not getting married and I'm not having kids, and that'll solve those problems, you're wrong. The fall is still going to be on you, okay? Not getting married, and so you don't have conflict with your husband, not having kids, which means you don't go through the travail of birthing children, raising children, all that kind of thing. You don't miss out on the fall by doing that. If you leave chapter 3 saying, gee, man, I'm not going to be a farmer. That's pretty clear. You don't want to be a farmer because all the thorns and thistles are going to push back on you. You miss the whole thing. When Solomon is talking about this, it looks like it's like a 9-to-5 job. But reading all of Ecclesiastes, which we're skipping, you see the fall is pushed into all areas of life. And there's no way to dodge it, not if you're male or female, not if you're unemployed or employed. You can't do it, okay? And so let's just keep the holistic idea in mind, even as we're focusing on work. So to his point about putting it in somebody else's hands, if you're a successful entrepreneur and then you hand your business over to some shareholders, to a board, you go public, you're no longer the owner. Who knows what's going to happen to that company, right? If you're a conscientious teacher and you put all your time and effort into this group of students, guess what? Next year they're going to get somebody else as a teacher. What is that person going to do with them? Not only that, where are they going to go with that education? What are they going to do with their job so that he thinks better of himself or she thinks better of herself in relationship to other things out there? Or the other side of this identity is I want to be thought of as competent, successful by other people. So whether it's me thinking about me or you thinking about me, I want you and me to evaluate me very highly. That's a part of what I'm striving for. That's part of what I want to be known for. That's part of how I want to know myself. And so these are wrong motives that in which we try to establish ourselves in comparison to benchmarks outside of ourselves, to other people, right? And so one reason that this is vanity is because these are only relative goods, right? Are you winning or losing? Well, it depends on who you compare yourself to, right? Just go ahead and choose somebody who's going to make you feel better, and they're in a worse situation, and you can look over them with a little bit of confidence, a little bit of look what I did, a little bit of pride, right? Or you can do the opposite. Compare yourself to somebody who's doing better than you, and so you can feel sorry for yourself. And think about how you got cheated out of that. And think about how they had the advantages. And you start to feel sorry for yourself. Whether you compare yourself positively by choosing somebody who's worse off than you, or negatively by choosing somebody who's better off than you, you're still self-centered. It's all about you either way, right? And so this is why it's called vanity. I mean, that might be the very picture of vanity that jumps to our mind, right? Well, the other thing is that he finds out that work can just grind you down. 2:22 and 23 says, "For what does a man get in all his labor and all his striving for which he labors under the sun? Because all his days task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity." Have you ever had a job or a responsibility that you lay in bed knowing you should be asleep and your mind is firing on that thing? I can definitely raise my hand. You should be sleeping, I should be sleeping, but I'm not. I'm thinking about the next day, the next meeting, the next confrontation, the next project, and I cannot sleep because of that. I had a job that I handled poorly mentally. It's not here, by the way. I had a job that I handled poor mentally, and that job created all kinds of reasons for me to stay up and think through that and worry about that and be concerned about that, and I did not stop that from happening. In other words, I engaged. The problem was partly the job, but mainly the problem is Pat, because who's staying awake? It's me. And the people who were causing my problems, they were sleeping like babies, I'm sure, right? They had no problem, right? But I've had a job like that. That's what he's describing, that God has made us for work. We learned that earlier last year, but the work is not beneficial or rewarding in the way that we had hoped, right? And like everything else since the fall, there's a sense of entropy to the job. It's a wearing down, both mentally and physically. And this is the time of year where some people are going off to college, right? There are people coming out of high school and going off to college, and they're very optimistic and hopeful about different aspects of this experience. And that's good. I'm hopeful for them as well. But I also know a few upperclassmen. And those upperclassmen are rather jaundiced about education and trying to get out of that four-year institution as quickly as possible, even if it takes 5 years. They're going to get out of there, right? They're in a hurry to get out of there. The upperclassmen feel like they've been ground down from the process, as well as be deceived by the promises of higher education, right? My point is that this verse applies whether you are getting paid for your responsibilities or you're paying somebody else to give you responsibilities, right? The money doesn't come into this. The task itself is painful, grievous, and does not lead to rest, even at night. And this is in a process in which you're actually making the money, right? I mean, there's other ways in which it is doing what it promised, but it grinds you down, all right? Remember Adam, he gets to eat from the fruit of his work, but now the ground is going to fight back and cause him to sweat. And the work itself is going to be frustrating. You're awake, concerned about the next thing looming, the next problem, or the due date, and it's the middle of the night. Something's wrong with that, all right? What do you do about that?
I was actually thinking about hitting this next a little bit too. So, what is that doing to my MD? Should I try to stop doing that?
Yeah. Stop that. That's good counsel, right? Stop that. Yeah. So. Come back next year when we talk about work under the cross or something like that. No, you have to think differently about your job. You have to think differently about your job, and depending on the specifics of it is how you approach it. But one thing you ought to know is the job is doing what the Bible promised it was going to do. Okay, so there's a sense in which you can hate the job, but that's a waste of time because the job is doing what the Bible said the job was going to do, okay? And so if you took the job, as we all do, we all walk into a new job, man, feeling good, the money's better than the last job, the situation is better. Everybody feels good about walking into a new job. But the job is actually doing what it promised to do. We were disillusioned about what was going to happen. Okay, and so I think the first thing is to realize the problem is not necessarily just the job. And I probably can't change a lot of the job. I mean, if I could have changed the job, it'd have been changed last week. And so all the changes I can really make have probably been done. So what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to think differently about the job. And that includes things like Solomon's going to tell us why are we there? Why does God have us there? And what are we supposed to accomplish? And Solomon doesn't really get to that kind of talk until much later in the book. But part of the problem is that we see things under the sun, as Solomon would say, and where it's me just going to work every day and the work given back. And yet, if you back off and see that God is the other person at work that I haven't been considering, then maybe I can think about this a little differently and add some value to it. Not that I can remove all the problems, but I can perhaps mitigate what those problems are doing to me and how I think about it. Yeah.
And so, you just say, okay, I'm just going to wait till Monday and then, or... Well, I mean, it seems to me like you can't, being human, you can't help sometimes thinking about what you anticipate, what you got to do.
Yeah, not the Bible, but Clint Eastwood once said, a man's got to know his limitations. And at work, you're kind of trying to figure out, what are my limitations? What am I willing to do? Why am I willing to do it? And how often am I going to do this? And you need to know, you need to be thoughtful about what's being asked of you, what's being demanded of you, and what you're willing to do. And I'm not saying that you evaluate your boss's instructions every time he gives you instructions. But at certain times in life, you have to step back and say, okay, what's going on here? And am I still going to participate in this in the same way? Yeah. That's what it means for you to plant the earth. You think you're raising one seed, and then thorns and thistles come and choke that stuff off, right? Working for money is vanity, is what Solomon finds out. It says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? Money in and of itself does not bring satisfaction. Okay, deal with rich people, and one of the things you're going to find out that may shock you is that they're not satisfied by what they have. Okay, they're just not. And part of that is in this verse, because the person, when good things increase, those who consume them increase. Okay, and what you find is you consume the good things, and guess what? You want more good things. Say that again? Yes. Yes, some of the consumers are not you, it's your near relations. That's correct, okay? Now, I want to introduce you to an idea. There are studies being done that are trying to measure happiness. This happiness measuring is a whole field of study. You can go to college and get a degree in this. The proper title is hedonics, all right? Where you get hedonism, trying to increase your own happiness. That's hedonism. Hedonics is the study of that happiness, okay? Now, it's not a hard science, because what makes you happy won't make me happy. It's not measurable like a glass of water or something like that. But in broad strokes, what they're trying to do is measure happiness and satisfaction and the level of contentment. And what you find out is extremely rich people are pretty much statistically satisfied to the same extent that poor people are. And actually, it's the middle class that is worse than both of these when it comes to satisfaction. Okay, so you're right. Rich people are slightly more happy than you, but guess what? So are poor people. Okay, maybe you want to go the other direction. Instead of trying to earn more money, maybe you want to have less. I don't know. You can try that if you want. I haven't made that choice yet, but go ahead, see how that works for you. All right, but why do the middle and upper class? Why does everybody score what they do, and why does the upper class score lower than you think they would, and why does the middle class score low? It's because we get stuff, even good stuff, and after a while, that stuff doesn't make us feel so good. All right, the feeling that we get from the stuff just wasn't what it was. And this is called hedonic adaptation. In other words, your excitement calms down, and you're not excited about the things that used to make you excited. All right, there's a guy named Dan Gilbert who is somebody in this field. I think I have. Do I have it? I have his quote in your stuff, I think. Yeah. Dan Gilbert says, part of us believe that the new car is better because it lasts longer. Okay, think about that. The new car is a better car because it lasts longer. But in fact, that's the worst thing about a new car, because it will stay around to disappoint you. All right, now think about that when you buy a car. All right, now again, this is a soft science, but typically what happens, studies show that if you're earning about $30,000 in salary, you think you'll be happy at about $50,000, okay? And that bump of $20,000 will make you extremely happy, right? Well, guess what? At $50,000, you don't feel, you were wondering how you made it at 30, but you don't feel good about it. You want to be at 75. And at 100K, you think the threshold of happiness is really about $250,000 a year. So if you're making $100,000 a year, $250,000 will really make you a happy person, okay? However, if you look at the real numbers that try to measure these people's happiness, the lowest income levels you get more money, and it in fact does make you happier and happier over a long run if you're starting at the lower levels, right? But then as you get better raises, even significant raises, I mean, we're talking like 40, 50%, bump in your salary, it doesn't provide the happiness that you thought it should, okay, that you thought it would. And they measure this in metrics called emotional well-being. You're just not as your emotional well-being is not bumped the way you thought it was, okay? And again, it's not a hard science. But really, where it taps out for Americans is about $75,000. If you get $75,000 a year, you're pretty much at the peak happiness you're going to get, okay? And I don't know if that gives you something to strive for or if that disappoints you, but Americans are just not going to get an emotional well-being bump much after that point, okay? Now, there are a couple other things you want to consider here. First of all, this is based on socioeconomic geography. For example, if you're in a poor nation like Haiti, a job promotion is measurably significant for a longer period of time, and in fact does help you greatly. However, in America, it's not the same. We don't get that long-term bump in our American emotional well-being. We don't have that correlation. The other thing to do is to look across history, because they've been asking these questions for many decades, really. So what would you think if you look around at all the benefits that modern people have? You would think that we ought to be at the happiest we are, right? I mean, here we are, sitting in an air-conditioned room. But if you look at what happiness was, say, in the 1940s, it's actually not much better. Now you think about what was going on in the 1940s, right? A lot of people didn't even have electricity. A lot of people didn't even have plumbing, and so when it comes to emotional well-being, it was about the same. In fact, what would that be? Maybe it would be my grandfather was slightly higher. Okay, so getting things like indoor plumbing and computers and phones doesn't really increase our happiness in an overall sense. A guy named David Myers wrote a book called The American Paradox, and it says, compared with their grandfathers, today's young adults have grown up with much more affluence, slightly less happiness, and in fact a much greater risk of depression and all kinds of social pathologies. Okay, now he's not a Christian, he's just a scientist, right, who measures stuff. All right. And so, yeah, this is basically what I just said. All right, I should have moved the screen. All right, let's shift a little bit and stop talking about money and start talking about grades, okay? Because some people who are around here are not paid in money, they're paid in grades, okay? And if you're a student, particularly a high school or college student, this is about you, and what you find is the same thing about grades. There was a study by a professor who used the whole University of California system, all the university schools in California under their state system, and they asked the question, what's going to happen to you if you get a grade that is significantly higher than what you expect? And what happens to you if you get a grade that's significantly lower than what you expect on this class? And the students all give an answer, okay? And this is called adaptive forecasting, okay? And what that means is project or predict how you're going to feel if this thing happens. That's what adaptive forecasting is. And typically the student says, well, you know, if I get a grade better than I expect, man, that's going to just make it. I'm going to be very happy. My parents are going to be very happy. It's going to boost my GPA up. I'll keep my scholarship, you know, just very excited about that concept. And then the opposite was true for lower. If I get a lower grade than I expect, man, that's going to, at places like Princeton, that almost makes kids suicidal, to be honest. And really, it does. But it's just devastating, right? And then they go back and visit this kid once they've got their grade and they asked, how do you feel? And then they come back and ask him or her months later, how do you feel? Right? And what happens is you weren't affected as emotionally as you thought you were going to be. It didn't devastate you when you got the low one. You managed to work through that. It didn't make your life when you got the good one. You managed to even out after that. And getting a lower grade than you expect is not, you were sad for a little while, but it didn't statistically make you a sadder person over the long run. And the opposite is also true. And what this means is we are particularly bad at forecasting what's going to make us happy. We're bad at it. You think something's going to make you want something's going to make you happy, and you think if I had to go through this, it's going to devastate me. But you know what? You're bad at predicting what it's going to do to you, either good or bad. And we always feel that we're going to feel far better about positive things and far worse about negative things than we actually feel, and actually feel over the long run as well. And so we're wrong. We're wrong about how we're going to feel, to the degree we're going to feel, and the duration of how we're going to feel it. Okay? And so to try to invest in experiences and feelings and things that are going to change how you feel about something is a fool's errand. And I've tried to point it out through the Bible, and quoting Solomon, I've tried to point it out through some science, as far as you can make science out of this stuff. Okay? Riches can be lost. There's a grievous evil which I've seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. Then these riches were lost through a bad investment, and he had fathered a son, and then there was nothing to support him. Now, there's some irony here, because this person is hoarding riches in order to better his life in some way. However, he ends up doing it to his own hurt. Okay, listen to this. Hoarding is not only sinful, it's dangerous. All right? You can sink your resources. And when I say resources, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about effort, time, skills, talents, everything. You can money. You can put this into a project and it will just waste away. All right? You might not be good at investing, might be one of the problems, but also the market can change on you. What you thought was valuable is no longer valuable to anybody. All right? And figuratively, you could just back the wrong horse, all right? I guess it's more than figurative. You could realistically back the wrong horse if it was a horse race. But it looked like a winner. You thought you had a no-doubter on your hand, but it will not pay off. It will not. And in our culture, we can have things litigated away. I mean, you can have a great idea. You can be in a perfect situation. I have a friend like this. He's got a great thing going, but all of a sudden he got sued by people who want a piece of this. And you can be on the right side of a legal battle, but drugged through the courts to the extent where you are bankrupt and you've got some kind of Pyrrhic victory. I was right, but I got nothing, right? In my rightness. And so this verse is talking about a person, and if you read the second part of this person has responsibilities. He has a family. And the work that was supposed to provide for himself and others just won't. And Look at the first part of this verse. It's an evil that's worth grieving over. It's a real loss, right? And because, in our minds, work is supposed to provide. It's supposed to give well-being. It's supposed to give us joy. It's supposed to give us security. It's supposed to take care of those around us. That's what it's supposed to do. But there are times where it just won't do that. It just won't, right? This is pretty depressing, isn't it? 5:13-14 says, there's a grievous evil in which I've seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. Then when these riches were lost through a bad investment, he had fathered a son, and then there was nothing to support him. That's troubling to me. Thinking through that is difficult. It doesn't say that the man was bad at his job. It doesn't say he was a sinner. It doesn't say anything negative about him or his son. This is a guy that on the surface is doing what you're supposed to do. Those are pretty convicting thoughts. Solomon, in fact, is going to guarantee that you will lose it all. All right? Ecclesiastes 5:15 says this, as he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hands. You know how you leave this world? You get one thing as you leave the world that you didn't have when you came into the world. That's a suit of clothes. That's all you get, right? You came in naked, you go out wearing something, but that's it. That's because we don't want to see you naked in a coffin, to be honest. Yeah. That's for our benefit, not yours. But you get nothing. You get nothing, right? 6:2, a man whom God has given riches and wealth and honor so that his soul lacks nothing at all that he desires, and yet God has not empowered him to eat from them, for a foreigner enjoys them. This is vanity and a severe affliction. There are two aspects of work, okay? And both have to be true for work to be good. Number one, it has to produce a good. Work has to produce a good. But here's the harder part. You have to be able to enjoy it. Okay? And that's the trick. And this is describing a person whose work produced something, but he was not able to enjoy it. All right? And it can provide, work can provide, it's producing what it's supposed to provide, but look who it's providing for here, your enemies. Right? And Ecclesiastes repeats this idea that having things is not enough. You also have to have the capacity to enjoy them. That's the real difficulty. All right? You can have stuff that can be taken from you and others enjoy. You can also have stuff that you just don't enjoy. And the ability to have joy and enjoy something is not really dependent on the stuff. We've already seen that. It has to do with your ability to enjoy. Right? And so the joy has to be independent of the stuff. Right? You see what I'm saying? The joy has to be not tethered to the stuff, but your ability to enjoy the stuff has to come from within you somehow. Because the stuff changes all the time. Right? And so having the capacity to enjoy is much more important. It's a severe affliction if you can't enjoy. Right? Can you imagine how all the stuff and you don't appreciate, you don't enjoy? That's like a ring of Dante's Inferno, I think. Right? Listen to another verse that says the same thing in a slightly different way. All a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. Right? These people are getting what they want. They're getting what they worked for. The job is providing what the job is supposed to provide. But there's a difference between laboring and enjoying the fruits of your labor. All right? Now this is where Solomon throws you a curveball. Because by this time, the way I've stacked up these verses, You might be thinking, okay, Solomon, you've convinced me. I will just sit here and work on my own contentment instead of going to work, right? If work is going to produce thorns and thistles, according to Adam, right, and I just need to work on me, contentment, bad work, I'll just be content, right? That's not what Solomon says to do. In chapter 11, verse 6, he says, sow your seed in the morning and do not be idle in the evening. All right? So this is somebody who's busy with their responsibilities night and day, right? And it says, for you do not know whether the morning or the evening sowing will succeed. All right? You don't know what's going to happen, or whether both of them alike will be good. Solomon says, work because there's an unknown idea. Work hard because there's an unknown idea. You don't know exactly what your work's going to produce. And so work hard at it. Now, if you think about what else Solomon has wrote, think about all those proverbs that he either wrote or collected, and they're very clear. They say, plan your work with wisdom. Plan your work with wisdom. Think about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, the methods. Plan your work. And then work your work with diligence. Go out there, and it will cause you to sweat. Go sweat. Go do it hard. You don't know how to do it? Look at the ant. He'll show you how, Go do the work. Solomon would never say don't work. But he does say what is produced is of the Lord, right? So you work, you plan your work wisely, you work your work diligently, and you trust the Lord to provide what he wants you to have. And so not working is not a biblical option, right? Now, Pastor told me I had to give you hope. So this is my last screen. I'm going to try to squeeze a little hope in here for you. And it's not much, okay? Certainly not as much as we need after this. But I'm going to end with the screen, and then if we have time for questions, I don't have a watch on me. You have to kind of help me with that. But so where's the hope in everything that we're talking about, okay? Here's the hope. Remember where we started in Ecclesiastes 2:11. It says, thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and all striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Okay? The last phrase in here I think you need to lock on to, because it says under the sun. And what Solomon has done in the ways I've collected these verses, I mean, you could read Ecclesiastes, it's not, I'm cherry picking, all right? But what Solomon has done throughout this book is really, when he puts this phrase in, and it shows up a lot in Ecclesiastes, it's a qualifier that describes a perspective and a worldview, okay? And what it means is that all the things Solomon's talking about, all the work we've looked at in particular, is what you see when you consider the creation alone. Okay, this is looking at the creation, what's under the sun. All right? And yet, there are some passages throughout Ecclesiastes that seem to be encouraging and contrary to these major themes of depression, that nothing's going to give you what you want, okay? Your wife's not going to give you what you want. Your husband's not going to give you what you want. Your education's not going to give you what you want. Your work is not going to give you what you want. Nothing's going to give you what you want. And yet, in all of those themes, there are these like bursts of, hey, go enjoy the wife of your youth. Hey, go enjoy the fruit of your work. And you get these encouraging passages that are contrary to the major themes. And yet these minor chords are pretty clear. There is a possibility to both work and enjoy work. It's possible, right? But it's only possible is if you receive the work from God as a gift, okay? In other words, you have to look beyond the creation. You have to look above the sun to see the Creator, okay? If you're going to get intrinsic value, long joy from your work, it cannot be connected just to your work. It must be connected to the Creator who's above the creation, okay? Ecclesiastes 24 and 25 says, there's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? And Solomon leaves you with two options here. Either work is illogical, existentially devastating, spiritually it's difficult, physically it's a slow crawl to the grave, or it's a gift from God in which he progresses his will in your life and provides for you as you are productive. Those are your two objects. Those are two ways you can go when you look at Ecclesiastes. And if you can't connect your work to God's hand, you're going to be extremely frustrated, extremely worn down, because you're always going to say, why am I doing this? This doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't matter if you're at home with kids, if you're a kid at school, if you're parents who both work, if you're working for hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you're working for pennies, it does not matter. It does not matter if it's a starting job. It does not matter if you're at the top of your game. This is how Ecclesiastes and Solomon lays it out. I'm gonna stop there, and if you have comments or questions, you can, yeah.
So on your last point, looking at work from above the sun, you don't mean by that looking at work in a theory. So one of the things that helps me in my work, in my view of work, is that God uses my work to enable me to feed my wife, myself, and my kids. That's really above the sun thinking. That's not,
Right.
I mean, it's under the sun stuff, but the thinking is coming from above the sun.
Right.
So you weren't saying that we look at work in a theory manner.
No.
But we're supposed to have a world view that informs our work.
Right, and so, and let me just kind of say it this way. If you think the spiritual, or you use the word ethereal, I want to change it to a spiritual. If you think the spiritual work and way and living is up here, and then you get up off your knees after your devotion and you go and do your physical job, whatever that is, and you have left the spiritual and now you're doing the physical, devotion times are over, now I'm doing physical, then you're going to have trouble at work. Because while one is spiritual and one is physical, what you have to see is that these two things come together in my life holistically. That God is working with me. He is with me. He participates with me, whether I'm praying quietly to him in the morning, nobody else hears, or whether I am in chaos at work, he is with me. Another way to think about this is why has God put me here? Okay, why am I here? Why am I in this room with these people? Why am I working? I'm looking at somebody I know has not working now, but had a hard time with a coworker. Why does God have me working next to this person when all I get is frustration here? Okay, you have to see that God's a part of that. Okay, that God has you in that room, that God has you with that person, that God has that person there rather than a nice person who's kind to you. Why has God put us together here? And start thinking through, this is from the hand of God. This is from the hand of God. And if you only have a philosophical, ethereal, spiritual idea up here, and it never comes to work with you down here, you got a problem. You got a problem, and it will not work out. You're still, when you go to clock in, or you still wake the kids up for school or whatever, you're still living under the sun at that point. Even though you had your devotions earlier. You have to, throughout the day, know that I am with me. One of the guys who's a hero to me in this is David. David, when he's explaining, he does it in 2 Samuel, around chapter 23, he describes himself in battle. And he says, when I jump over a wall, God jumps with me. When I pull back the bow, it's God's hand who's pulling it back with me. Everything he does, he sees God with him and in him. And that's at war, right? And that idea that I am where I'm at, doing what I'm doing for the reasons I'm doing it, it's not just that I can be blessed by the material that comes out of this and by groceries and stuff like that. It's that even in the working, regardless of the paycheck, even in the working, God is with me and I'm here for him, because of him, that kind of thing.
In my own life, that's, I see that makes me more and more dependent on God when I'm working. Because sometimes I can sit there and I don't know what I'm going to do with this life. I don't know how I'm going to figure this thing out. And then as I continue to try it and do things happen. It happens, and you tell, I verbalize those things to the Lord. I said, I'm blind to this. And so as I continue to move things happen. And so the next time I'm in that situation, that's the first thing I do. Yeah. And that's the first thing my mind goes through. And, you know, sometimes I don't even verbalize these things to my wife, but you become more and more dependent on the Lord when you are working. And then when these things happen, you glorify him. I thank him for him, helping me figure these things out on my job. And it is a real joy to become dependent on the Lord when you are working.
Which you also note, one thing that you receive from that is you become a more thankful person. I have a testimony like that too from my days at UPS.
Whatever it is, it's like I'm looking like to something for my hope. Basically, like if I had X, then I'd be great. Kind of like the salary could be one of those things. Like if I was at 150K, man, life would be so fantastic. And then whenever I find myself thinking like that, I'm basically on a path. I'm setting myself up for a path to vanity because I'm putting my hope in that number,
right,
in whatever it is. It could be, it doesn't have to be financial.
Right.
And it's just that struggle to kind of live in the moment and be content and happy in the moment. With the thorns and the thistles and all that stuff. It's, if I'm thinking that way, I'm striving after the wind, basically, it's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think I'm striving after, in my mind, I think I'm striving after something that's going to make me feel better.
I'm blanking on the author right now, but our Sunday school did a book study a few years ago on, the book was entitled The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. And I don't think it's Thomas Watson. Who is it, Pam? Jeremiah Burroughs. And Jeremiah Burroughs wrote that. And it was very beneficial on the idea of contentment. And that's not the only answer to our perspective on work. But that book helps you recognize very well that it's God's hand that is in your context. Your context is God-given context. So the question is not, how do I get out of my context? The question is, how do I glorify God in my context? How do I accomplish God's will in my context? And that's a different trajectory altogether. Next week we're going to look at this again. There are 5 Sundays in this month, so that 5th Sunday, I think I'm right on that. Earl's nodding his head. I'm right on that. Okay, so that fifth Sunday, I'm not saying the whole thing about BQ&A, but if you get some questions in or some situations you want us to talk about, I'm sure we can do that. You can send them to me, you can send them to Pastor, you can send them to the office. You know how to get a hold of us. So we would like to open it up for you to direct a little bit of our thinking and comments here. So if you do that, if you want to do that, you're welcome to. I'd encourage you to do that. But let's pray. Father, we're grateful for your mercies, for your kindness, for your goodness, and even living under the fall, even working under the fall, you are there to redeem it as well, to make it better, to make it holy, to make it produce, as well as to provide for us. And so we're grateful for work, even though it is very difficult, it has many pitfalls, and it overpromises. Thank you for it. Thank you for our ability to expend our efforts in doing your will. We ask now that you would go with us into church, help us to worship you in light of all your goodness to us. May you become bigger in our estimation, that we would see you a little bit more for who you really are, and that as we glorify you, as we magnify you, as we love you deeper, that, Lord, we know we'll benefit from that. And we're just thank you for that already. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.